Is marriage biblical? According to Christians, it is. According to them, marriage is ordained by God. Genesis 2:22 through 24 says God brought her to the man. And Adam said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." Is the Bible telling us that God performed some sort of ceremony? Without a doubt the answer is no. The Bible tells us that Adam was lonely. He had seen all the other animals with mates and wanted a mate for himself. God took pity on Adam, which is a very rare thing for God to do, put him into a deep sleep, took out a rib, made a woman from it, and gave her to Adam as a helpmeet. To me, this is the first sign of the misogyny that is rampant throughout the Bible. God didn't provide Adam with a partner. Instead, he provided him with a servant, someone to cater to Adam's every need with no thought given to her needs and desires. Now for a small digression. God put Adam into a deep sleep, removed a rib and made a woman. If the story was true, then Eve would have been genetically identical to Adam. In other words, she would really have been a he, not a she, and we are expected to believe that we are all descended from a man and his transgender clone. I can't criticize the unknown author of Genesis for getting this wrong because he knew nothing of genetics. However, people in the 21st century have no such excuse. Getting back to the topic of marriage in the Bible, what else does the Bible have to say? Colossians 3:16, Titus 2:5 and 1 Peter 3:1 tells us that wives are to submit themselves to their husbands. All emphasize that a woman is subservient to a man. 1 Corinthians 11:7 tells us that women are subservient because the first woman came from Adam, and that the woman was created for the man's sake, not hers. Yet another example of misogyny in the Bible. Genesis 38:6-10 tells us that, if a man's married brother dies before his wife has a child, then he must marry the widow. The widow has no choice but to marry her brother-in-law and submit to him sexually. That sounds incestuous, but unless his brother married a female relative, it isn't. According to the Bible, a man can have as many wives and concubines as he can afford. Abraham had a wife and 2 concubines. Gideon, Nah, Jacob, Eliphaz, and Manasseh were a bit more conservative, having only 1 wife and 1 concubine each, while Solomon had 300 concubines. Nowhere in the Bible does it say that a woman can have more than 1 husband, nor does it allow her to have gigolos. I think that is because the Bible considers females to be the property of her father and, after he trades her in marriage, to her husband. Although not explicitly saying so, the Bible tells us that polygamy was fine. According to the Bible, Lamech, Jacob, and Elkanah had 2 wives each. Esau and Rehoboam each had 3. Abijah had 14. David and Gideon had many, and Solomon, the guy with 300 concubines, had 700 wives. Under Moses' command, a command that came from God, the Israelites killed every Midianite man, woman, and child, but were allowed to keep the virgin girls as spoils of war. We all know what that means. Most Christians will say that the Bible doesn't endorse slavery. It does, but that's the subject of another video. So, with respect to slavery, what does the Bible say about marriage? Exodus 21 foretells us that a slave owner can give his male slave a wife, and that she must submit sexually to her husband. As is always the case in the Bible, the woman has no say in the matter whatsoever. Christians would have you believe that marriage started a few days after creation, which, according to young Earth creationists, happened around 6,000 years ago. Science tells us that the Earth is far older than that, and also that Homo sapiens evolved around 250,000 years ago. That makes it reasonable to assume that marriage, of some sort, predates the Bible by many millennia. Stan Tatkin is a doctor of clinical psychology. He has written a really good book called Wired for Love, in which, among other things, he discusses marriage through the ages. The foreword was written by Harville Hendrix, also a holder of a PhD in psychology. In the foreword, Hendrix says that couplehood has been, from the dawn of human history, the primary social structure of our species, giving rise to larger structures of family, community, society, culture, and civilization. When he says the dawn of human history, he may be referring to the rise of our species 250,000 years ago, or he may be referring to written history, which dates back around 5,000 years. If he's referring to the latter, I find it hard to believe that, suddenly, 5,000 years ago, humans decided to formalize couplehood. Hendricks goes on to say that, no longer having to search for food, they settled down into small compounds and villages, and the concept of property that had to be protected arose. This concept may have applied at first only to animals and crops, but since children and women also needed protection, the concept eventually extended to include them. The second version of couplehood, the arranged marriage, was born. It had nothing to do with romantic attraction, personal needs, or mature love, and everything to do with social status, economic security, and political expedience. In other words, the idea of females as being the property of the males in their lives predates the Bible, the first book of which was written about 2,500 years ago. From this, it's reasonable to conclude that couplehood long predates the Bible. In other words, the concept of marriage did not come from the Bible. In the 21st century, the majority of nations require a couple to get a license from the government to get married. All countries that have signed or ratified the United Nations Convention on Consent to Marriage, Minimum Age for Marriage, and Registration of Marriages, or the United Nations Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, must maintain a register of marriage. Tracking is affected by the requirement to get a license. Also, most countries define the conditions of civil marriage separately from religious requirements. In other words, in many countries, a marriage performed in a church, mosque, temple, etc. is not legally recognized unless a license has first been obtained from the government. So, back to the question I asked at the start. Is marriage biblical? Despite what Christians have to say, marriage is not now, and never has been, biblical. If you like what I do and want to see more, please click like, subscribe and ring that notification bell.